Hi, it's David Sable again, back with New York Festivals, bringing you creativity from the other side. I am here with a dear friend, a mentor, and somebody that I learn a lot from, and somebody that I wish I had worked for back in the day, Martin Puris, one of the great legends of our industry. Martin.
You were too kind.
Welcome.
I don't know what to say after that. I should just leave after that.
No, but it's true. It's true. The truth of the matter is that I met you, it's almost 20 years ago, the first time. And I'd known a lot of people who worked at Ammirati Puris. And I have to say...
Some of the best in the business.
Some of the best in the business. And I have to say it's one of the few places that I've never, ever heard anybody who worked there say anything other than it was the best place I ever worked. And that's really true. I'm not just saying that.
Ralph may not agree with it, but
that's probably true. But most people did believe that. So I always respect it. So I met you first at breakfast at Michael's. You were sitting in your table.
My table.
Your table in the front, of the back of the front.
Yeah.
Which I learned from always like the people who don't count sit in the front. You sat in the back always. It was the first of many that continue to this day, and I thank you for it. So we're here to talk about creativity. And I thought that to start with, I really like to understand a little bit about how you got into copywriting and the things that drove your creativity. So you started writing comedy.
Yeah.
And you started in Chicago, which I think is really interesting. So did Keith Reinhardt. It seems like some of the greatest writers of our
came
time.
From Chicago.
And so, as did, by the way, Second City, which I think is also, for those who don't know, Second City sort of being the precursor
inspiration
to Saturday
almost
Night
everybody,
Live.
And out of Second City came some of Mike Nichols, Elaine May, Shelley Berman, Bob Newhart. I mean, just a list of comedy greats. And it was a time, I started out in comedy. I wanted to be a stand-up comic in a time when political satire was the thing.
So it was like Lenny Bruce.
It was Lenny Bruce, Mort Saul, Mike Nichols, Elaine May.
Just think you could be on the magnificent Mrs. Maisels.
I could
had
be.
You stayed.
Had I stayed. And I got a job, and I got, and so I went to work in Chicago, across the street from the Playboy Club, and later at the Playboy Club. That was my last job. The whole career lasted.
One I didn't know.
Well, the whole career lasted a year. Right. And during that year, I found out that I really hated the business of being a nightclub comic. I was about to be managed by a guy named Tweet Hogan. Tweet Hogan was an 18-year-old band leader or something in the 30s who found out that he had a knack for developing comedians. So among his comedians were Bob Newhart, Mike Nichols, Elaine May, Shelley Berman, Mort Saul, not Lenny Bruce. And I heard all their initial tapes, which were terrible. And Bob Newhart had never performed in front of anything. And he did this tape. It wasn't funny. And Tweet Hogan developed these people. He just had a genius for developing comedians. So I wrote some comedy material. And a friend of mine had a production company in Chicago, and I can't remember the name of the company. Said, "Would you like to do some commercials?" I said, "Yeah, sure, why not? What does it pay?" And he said what it paid, and it paid a lot. And so I said, "Fine, great." He said, "Well, we need them over the weekend, though." So I did 2 commercials over the weekend, and they bought them, and they loved them. And I loved doing them, so I did.
Do you remember what they were for?
It was for a dairy, and I don't remember the name of the dairy anymore. It was, an ancient dairy. It probably doesn't exist anymore. But
dairies, by the way, for those who don't know, is where milk used to come from. So.
Yes, that's true. And occasionally ice cream and other stuff. Anyway, so I loved it. I loved doing it. And so now, and I know what I was going to do, because now I'd left school. I got this job. I found out I hated what I was doing. And I didn't like writing comedy material because it was even worse. You had to spend all day writing, and then you would have to watch them perform what you'd written in the clubs, which I didn't want to be in. And so it was worse than just performing or just writing. And I decided I didn't want to do that either, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to be a writer. That's what I always wanted to be. And I found out what people who worked at newspapers made, and I said, well, that's not for me. And so I was really at sea. And then I did these commercials and loved them. So I got a job. My first job, I always loved cars, and I wanted to work on cars. So my first job was at NWR in Detroit. And I was there for 6 months. And Campbell Ewald offered me a job. And I went to Campbell Ewald, and I stayed there for a year. I'll never forget. I had no idea
you had
where
a lot of longevity.
Yeah, well,
your early career.
Yeah, my early career. Well, I wanted to work on cars, and I had no idea that the advertising business was not in Chicago or Detroit, that it was actually in New York. That's how little I knew about advertising. And the reason I left Campbell Ewald, Marvin Honig was there. We had some actually great people working at the time at Campbell Ewald. I wrote a friend of mine a note my second day there, and I said I'd made another terrible mistake. And it took me a year to get a job in New York. Otherwise, I would have left sooner. I remember that I walked into they actually liked me, and I liked them as people. I just didn't want to be there. And the copy chief had heard that I was looking around for a job, and he takes me to his office and sits me down, goes back behind his desk, and he said, "Martin, what do you want out of this place?" And I said, "Me." So anyway, I got a job at Young & Rubicam. Pete Peabody was copy chief, and Steve Frankfurt was, no, Pete wasn't copy chief. He was a creative director. And Dermot McCarthy was copy chief, and Steve Frankfurt was head of the art department. And I actually wanted to go. I remember, yeah. Steve was great. He actually doesn't get as much credit as he deserves, because he really was the father of the modern commercial. Advertising agencies were doing radio commercials with pictures. And he hired all these guys from Los Angeles, Stan Dragoti and a bunch of big-time guys, and brought them back to New York. And they created things like Eastern Airlines. I mean, just brilliant stuff. It was the first time that you could see where the advertising business was going to go. And we were just copying Hollywood, and Hollywood ends up copying us and a lot of things that we did in the business. At any rate, I wanted to go to Carl Alley. I decided I didn't want to go to Doyle Dane. I talked to them, and I thought they were too big. I don't know how big they were, but they weren't that big. Carl Alley had just started, and I think they were billing a total of $3 million, Carl and Jim and Emil. And they said, well, we'd like to hire you, but we don't have enough business, so we'll hire you when we can. So why don't you take the job at Y&R, which was great, because they were doing great stuff. And I went. And a year later, Jim Durfee, who was the copy chief, called and said, we just got the World Journal Tribune. No, we got the Herald Tribune, which became the World Journal Tribune, which became out of business. He said, we'll hire you, come to work. So I did. I stayed there for 8.5 years until we opened our own agency. That was a great place to work. Jim and Emil Gargano were amazing people.
So you talked a little bit about how Hollywood, and then Hollywood was copying. In the past, you've talked about advertising was exploding at that time, like you felt that.
Well, so yeah, exactly. So this, we go back to 1965, 66, and advertising was the business that everybody wanted to be in. People were leaving medical school to become copywriters, and it attracted just great brains, big thinkers, giants, big ideas. And the business, Birnbach gave everybody the chance. And Birnbach's story was that he was doing he was a copywriter, Gray. Started the agency and was knocking around for 15 years before it finally happened. I think he got Lowe's, and then he got, which was locally important and good work, and then he got Volkswagen and Avis, and then it just, exploded. But he changed the business. And everybody wanted to be in that business. It was, first of all, it was a high-paying business. This was before the investment banker, a banker was a kid, who didn't do too well in school, and his father got him a job at Bankers Trust giving car loans or something. That was a banker. There was no multi-zillion dollar investment banker jobs. Anyway, I decided that was it. And I got into it, and I'll never forget, because that was at 285 Madison, right, which was an old
That's where I
line
started,
R,
yeah.
right? I was living in Connecticut, walking back late one night to the train, and I thought, it like suddenly hit me. I said, I can't believe I am getting paid to do this. It's the best thing I've ever done in my life. And it was exciting times, you know.
I still feel that way.
Well, you know, it's a business I love, but I was fortunate enough to work in it and live in it when it was advertising's golden years. Some may take issue with that, but I place it between the mid-'60s and the late '80s, filtering into the early '90s. It was really a time of big ideas and big people and big thinkers and clients as well, by the way. Coincidentally, it was American businesses' golden years.
So let's talk about big ideas.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about a company that today we all know called BMW,
Yeah,
who make incredible cars. In fact, one of the
Yeah.
most incredible cars I've ever owned.
yeah, they
But
do.
back in the day, when
Well-
they came to you, it was like a shitty-looking Corvair,
Yeah.
priced the same
as
as
a
a
Cadillac
Cadillac
or a Mercedes or a
whatever,
Lincoln, yeah.
and it looked like crap.
Yeah.
Nobody ever heard of it, and
Yeah.
then you called it the ultimate driving machine,
Yeah.
and literally, in my view,
Yeah.
changed the trajectory, not just of their business, but maybe of the car business.
Yeah, you know, we were fortunate. We knew a lot about cars because Volvo was at Carl Alley, and then Fiat. We did a
You
kind of
did
a
Fiat.
famous Fiat campaign
Right.
before we left Carl Alley, Ralph and I, and so we knew. And we
Right, that
wanted-
was the. Talk a little bit about that because the Fiat campaign is the campaign that really put you on the map
Yeah,
for
yeah.
Maserati Puris.
Well, again, it was fortunate, you know, because Volkswagen was how Americans defined small cars. And they didn't know from Fiat, they didn't know from Renault, they didn't know from anything except Volkswagen. And the fact is that Fiat was the biggest selling small car in Europe. And so that became our campaign. In fact, the line was the biggest selling small car in Europe, which came as a shock to Americans. And we did commercials with Enzo Ferrari, who we found out up in Modena, where Ferraris are built. In real life, he drove around in a Fiat 124. We did some famous stuff for him, but it was fortunate. And we said, you know, when it comes to small cars, you can't fool a European. And Americans didn't know. And so, well, the funny part was they had no quality control at all. So we got...
I studied all that work. It was brilliant.
It was really, thank you. It was good. We, 2 years, I think we had the account for 2 years, and we got them from about 5 cars to 100,000 cars in two and a half years.
So go back to the insight. The insight was
The insight was the insight was simple actually. It was simpler than either BMW or Club Med, for example, which is another one.
we're going to get to that one.
All American, they want to come to America. They want to spend some money and develop this market. Americans they'd never heard of the word Fiat, and they thought Volkswagen was it. That was the only small European car that Americans knew. Well, the fact that in Europe, where they've been buying small cars for 75 years, Fiat's the biggest selling car is a big statement to an American, and so that was the insight. We just need to tell them that in Europe, where people really know small cars, this is the one they buy, and it took off. But unfortunately, they had no quality control, and I'll never forget. I was commuting from Westport, and it got to the point, and friends who bought Fiats because of our advertising would attack me, and it got to the point where I had to stand at the end of the platform with a Wall Street Journal this high so nobody could see me, because guys would come up and say, "You son of a bitch, I bought this car and the steering wheel came off, the windshield came out." It's like unbelievable. And it was so bad that they kind of left the market until recently, and now they're back big time, completely different cars, but the quality control was non-existent. That was the insight.
Then you move into BMW.
So
And again,
now-
like we said, the Corvette, it looks like crap.
It looks
Like
yeah.
Corvette, rather. It looks like
Well,
crap,
it's a
terrible
joke.
car.
Well,
How did you drive it, and how did you sell it to these Germans?
well, selling it to the German engineers was a snap. selling it to the German marketing people took a little more time. But BMW, if you're going to have a speculative pitch, and it was a speculative pitch, we had no business at the time. We didn't have an account.
Do you remember who you were pitching against?
Yeah, Benton and Bowles and Ted Bates.
Wow.
And they didn't understand the car at all. Not at all.
Giants back in the day.
They were giants. Their advertising wasn't so great, but they were giants, yeah. And they had lots of car experience between them. And we didn't have any business. We didn't have an account. I found a way in through a friend of mine who worked at Y&R in Germany, and I'm blanking on his name. I called him and I said, "Do you know anybody at BMW?" And he said, "By chance I do, and not only that, they're looking for an advertising agency. So I'll introduce you to Carl Wimmer, who was the advertising director, global advertising director." So there's a funny end to this story, but we had a grand idea of how we wanted to open an agency. We did not want to start with a bunch of small accounts and be stuck there for 10, 15 years. Because, one of the things a client does that you're pitching, looks at your list of clients, and if you got a bunch of small clients, big clients don't feel very comfortable with that. So we said, we're going to finance it for a year. Y&R was our joint venture partner. You knew that, I guess, right? And the reason they were is because this conflict thing was becoming a real problem, and you had gone public, and you had one of everything. So your revenue was just dependent on your present clients and how their businesses were going. And Ed, I'll never forget, he said, whispering, "Ed, I've got a big problem." I said, "Really, Ed? I wish I had your problems. What's your problem?" He talked about the conflict thing. He said, Alec Kroll, who was a junior copywriter next to me at Y&R, hooked us up, and he said, "Well, this conflict issue is a real problem, and we think maybe, we'll go joint. You put up half, we'll put up half, and let's give it a year and see what we get." So during that year, we turned down all kinds of accounts. Burial at Sea from L.A., believe it or not, which is a company. Came in to see it, and we could barely keep a straight face, as these guys described how they took you out to sea with a band if you paid for it and dumped you overboard. Anyway, and they were trying to come to New York, which was a crazy idea to start with the Hudson River, start shoving bodies. Anyway, we turned all the accounts down, and so we get into the BMW pitch. Now we are running out of money because it's like the end, and we have no clients and no income. So we pitched, and we won, and now so they called, Wimmer called, and he said, or I guess it was by that time the American CEO, Jack something. Anyway, he said, "Well, you got the business." I said, "Great, when can we announce it?" He said, "Well, not so fast." He said, "We have to talk about money." And I said, "Okay, well, we gave you an estimate." And he said, "Yeah, well, that's an estimate." Well, I said, No, that's not an estimate, that's the cost. This isn't an offer, this is what it's going to be. We went around literally for 3 months, back and forth, and we wouldn't give because we said, "No, that's what it's going to cost you. We're not giving a penny in this." So now we are running out of money. We have 14 days worth of cash left in the bank before we close at the Delmonico Hotel, which is where we opened. We had 3 of us and a secretary.
The original WeWorks.
Yeah. Well, Julian Avertick was the third guy then. He left after the first year. But we had Julian and I and Ralph and a secretary that all 3 of us hated. That was the atmosphere at the Delmonico. Anyway, so finally, Bob Lutz was the marketing director of BMW then. And Bob Lutz is a Swiss-American ex-Marine who was later CEO of, I think, Chrysler, and big guy. He's a legend in the car business. He's one of the, half a dozen legends in the car business. And he was in the presentation. He didn't know about the negotiations. So they finally took it to him and they said, this is where we are. We can't get these guys to budge. And we think they're charging too much, but we just can't get them off the dime. And refusing to take the business. And Les puts his hand down and he says, look, guys, stop this. We're going to the American market. We got to get started. Okay, these guys are either the smartest guys in the world or the biggest assholes, but we're not going to know until we hire them and find out. That's how we got hired.
And so you started the campaign, it ran just in print, I think,
the first
in the
ad,
beginning.
yeah, we decided, we dominated the New Yorker, and we had an $800,000 advertising budget, and we had spreads in the New Yorker, and we said, you know, where we are, we want to be, to feel major. And so we targeted media, and we, you know, the budget went up, you know.
And something that I know will make all of our...
The first ad was the Ultimate Driving Machine.
Right.
The second ad was our status symbols under the hood, not on it. And we did a whole bunch of
But Ultimate Driving Machine stayed with them for 40 years.
Oh no, it's almost 50.
Almost
It's
50.
still running.
Yeah.
It's probably
It's one of the
long-
great,
yeah.
one of the great defining lines of advertising, I think.
Well, the marketing people in Germany didn't quite. They got it, but they didn't quite get it. They were worried about driving machine. It sounds, we have a luxury car, an expensive car. Driving machine doesn't sound like expensive car. And we said, well, you know, we tried to explain to them. The engineers, the German engineers, got it in an instant. They were lighting up, you know. The presentation before ours, I won't say which agency it was, to show you how little they understood. Insight is what we're talking about, insight into the market, which I'll get to in 1 second, because it's really important. That's really what changed everything, is who we decided to sell this car to. The last agency to present before us, they had this piece de resistance, they thought, was an ad. They were ashamed of the car. They wouldn't show it full on in any of the work that they did. And the last ad was a picture of the car, and the headline was, "This best thing to come out of Germany since Henry Kissinger." And they thought that was terrific, right? And evidently it was like the shot from the producers, Springtime for Hitler, when
Got it.
what?
All right, that's...
Yeah, anyway.
Sad.
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 But the insight was simply, I should have gotten to this sooner, because that's really, the Ultimate Driving Machine comes from an insight, here's what we told them. We said, look, this car doesn't look anything like a Lincoln or a Cadillac. Lincolns are, you know, miles of chrome and tons of whatever, bullshit cars. And your car looks like an old Corvair, and it costs the same, and we know what you're going to build. It's going to be a real improvement. But it's not going to look like a Lincoln or a Cadillac, nor do you ever want it to look like a Lincoln or a Cadillac. But here's the thing. There's a group of people, the New York Times said we invented the word yuppie. We didn't, actually. We called them affluent activists. Somebody else did yuppie, but that's who they were. And we said there's a group of people coming through the United States and the world, for that matter, where health is a big thing now, fitness is a big thing, it's working out.
And what year was that?
65.
So we're just like, some things
65.
never change, yeah?
No, sorry, 75.
Okay.
Christmas of 74. And the yuppie was just starting to be talked about. We said, to a yuppie, there is no car that looks like them. You know, they don't look like a Cadillac, they don't look like a Lincoln, they don't look like a Mercedes either. They look like a BMW. And they will understand it if you tell them. That was the insight.
I love it. So let's move to another client and another insight. So Club Med.
Club Med was the most
Americans
difficult.
went to
Yeah.
hotels, they paid full board, called the American Plan.
Yeah.
It was kind of, you know, watching Mrs. Maisels, you get a sense of what was passing for hotels in those days. And all of a sudden, you come to the market with a place that seems hedonistic, people run around naked, and certainly in the minds of the people who are watching it, and you pay for everything up front and just everything else is free.
Yeah.
How'd you do that?
Yeah, well, that was the toughest. I think of you know, UPS is another favorite of mine, but BMW, of course, others, but Club Med was actually the one I'm the most proud of, because it was the most difficult problem to solve, as you're talking about, right? I had never been to a Club Med. I never wanted to go to a Club Med. People in the agency had been to Club Meds and really liked them. Club Med started back in France as a communist vacation. The old man, what's his name, the founder, Trigano, was a communist, as all French students were, I think, in those days after the war. And so his family owned a canvas company, and this German named Blatz came to him to buy tents, because it originally was going to be tents on beaches. And Trigano liked the idea so much that he bought the idea from this guy and started Club Med. It was no more risque than the French were risque. The French used to walk around topless on beaches. It wasn't a big deal. In America, it was like, oh my God, topless on beaches. Have we ever heard of that? So big success in France. There was a day that you could enroll to go to Club Med, and they would literally line up like for a Super Bowl tickets. They would get there the night before to get in to take a vacation. It was a huge success for Europeans and particularly the French. Anyway, they come to America. And they succeeded in the beginning because a lot of people thought the topless thing and the risque thing was a cool thing to do in the Caribbean, so they became very successful quickly. But then it started to top off. And they decided that they had to become more of a family vacation, that they would still have these places that were a little more risque than others, but if they were going to succeed, they had to become a family vacation. So anyway, we get the business. And now we have to do a campaign. It wasn't a pitch. And we have no idea what we're going to say. I said, they have clean towels maybe every morning. There's no TV, no better table at a restaurant, no mail, no money. You bought beads and you paid for things in beads. And I said, this is like the antithesis of any vacation an American would ever want to be on. But now we're faced with a campaign, right? We got to do something. What are we going to say? What are we going to say? So this is one of those, 11:30 at night things about 2 days before the presentation. We still don't have anything. And we're up there working, and I'm in my office stewing. And I don't know, out of the blue, literally out of the blue, it came to me. What was special about this was why you need a vacation to begin with, because you need a vacation to get away from things like newspapers, television sets, better tables, money. We've removed all that, right? And ergo the antidote for civilization. Right? Civilization is what you need a vacation from. So that was the campaign, and it was hard coming, and it may be the thing I'm most proud of because it was so hard coming, and it was a huge success. And then we had them for 4 years, and I fired them at breakfast at the Oak Room because Serge Trigano, who was the son of the founder, was a good guy, but he could be very difficult when he wanted to be, and he was being very difficult that morning. And I said, "Okay, we're firing you," and I got up and left. So they called and said, "Were you serious?" I said, "Yeah, I'm serious. It just isn't working. We're gonna end this now." So they go away for 2 years. And they do, I don't even know what they do, drivel, terrible stuff. And then I get a call from Jacques Giraud, who was the only guy that I really enjoyed working with at Club Med. And Jacques says, "Would you guys think of taking us back?" And I said, "I don't know, Jacques." I was like, they're so difficult. And he said, "No, but I'm going to be running the company in the United States." I said, "Oh, well, that's different. You're serious?" He said, "Yeah, I'm going to be there." I said, "Okay, well, look, if you're going to be there and you want us back, we'll come back." So we come back. And 6 months later, Jacques announces he's retiring. And now we're stuck with the same crew. And it lasted for another 4 years. And then one morning at breakfast in the Oak Room with Serge Trigano, he said something else, and I fired him for the second time.
I think this notion of firing is something that is going to speak to everybody who's listening. I love the fact that you were famous
for firing
clients. What would you tell young creatives today? What do you think is the key to getting to a great idea? Is it that sitting there till all hours until it hits you?
It often is. Well, first of all, our challenges in the business today are different, and the vehicles we use to reach people are different. But the values upon which our success is based is old, and it's being lost, I think.
So talk about that. What's been lost?
I look around and I don't see big ideas anymore. I see a lot of small ideas and forgettable messages. I watch Super Bowls with friends who haven't the vaguest idea of what these people have just paid $10, $15 million, including production, for a commercial that they don't know whose it is, or if they know whose it is, they don't know what it said, and if they know what it said, what they said doesn't mean anything to them. And Super Bowl being the place, the Super Bowl, the Grammys, the places where the campaigns, coagulate. And if I go back, I have to go back to a previous time when there were big ideas. Well, first of all, what is a big idea? Right? A big idea is something that's a preemptive claim. It has to start with a preemptive claim. It has to be meaningful to the consumer, so you have to understand what the consumer is looking for. It has to be memorable, and it has to be compelling. Advertising is supposed to sell stuff. In the end, it can be entertaining, but it's not, a sitcom. It's something that people are going to want. They invest all this money, they expect to get something back for it. So if it isn't any of those four things, then why are you spending $15 million to put it on the Super Bowl? So that nobody knows what it is or cares or just goes over their heads or under their heads. And how many parts of a company would they be willing to tear up $15 million in 60 seconds? I think not many, probably. not if anybody wanted to keep their jobs, at least. But advertising has devolved, and I think it happened in a couple of ways. Well, how long do we have for this? Because I watched it, I watched it from the beginning to the end.
Succinctly, we need succinctly.
Well, first of all, clients were different in those days. There were things called, there wasn't a CMO, there were no CMOs, there were advertising directors, and they were legends.
Brand managers.
Yeah, they were legends in and of themselves. A guy like, the guy at Pepsi that worked with Phil Duesenberry and all that great stuff, blanking on his name. Anyway, they understood the business, they understood advertising. Most of them came out of the advertising business. Few of them went to business school. And they understood what good was, they understood what a big idea was, and they demanded it, by the way. We worked for a guy, Jerry Shapiro at Hertz, when we were at Carl Alley, and he knew exactly what a big idea was, and if it wasn't, he would send it back, and he was a CEO, I think the golden age of the advertising business was also the golden age of American business. I think they were at their creative best, and so were the advertising agencies that served them. The other thing is that
So we've talked a lot about that in prior interviews, the notion of the client and the agency needing to be aligned, that good work comes as much from the client as it does from the agency.
Well, what I say is the check writers are every bit as guilty as the copywriters. How did the business change? It changed when we started cutting fees, which I think started a doom loop, because you pay less, you get less, you pay still less, you get still less. You're working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and all those medical school dropouts don't want to become copywriters, they want to become investment bankers instead. And so you get a brain drain, which affects what your work product is. And I think there are plenty of bright people still in the business and young people coming into the business, but so why is the work so bad? It doesn't have big ideas. I walk away from these things. I brought a list because because there's a comparison that has to be made, and I can't put all these to memory because there are too many of them. But as three quick examples of what a big idea is. Avis is only number 2 in rent-a-cars. We have to try harder is a big idea. For those who weren't alive when that campaign ran, the reason it was a big idea is because Hertz was losing it. They were getting fat and lazy. Avis was number 2, but they had to convince people that they tried harder. So the brilliance of the campaign, the art form, was number 2. It would have worked had they said, well, we try harder, because Hertz was falling apart. But the brilliance of it was we're only number 2. Now, nobody in America had ever said they were number 2.
Right.
It was almost anti-American to say you're number 2. And I'll never forget when the campaign came out, it was a shock. Why would they say that? They're number 2. Who would admit to that? Well, it was genius, right? And that's a big idea.
Right, and in a world, by the way, where viral advertising is so important, back in the day, people were wearing buttons.
Oh, yeah,
They said, "We try harder."
absolutely.
Everybody had "We try." It became literally a
Part
part
of
of
the
the
culture.
social content of the country.
Completely.
It was totally cultural.
Another one I want to mention is Apple's first a computer for the rest of us. That was a brilliant insight. And that's why they built the first Apple, because you had to be an engineer to use a computer.
And you worked with Steve.
I worked with him for 2.5 years. I loved him. I really miss him, but not everybody loved him. I had to, Ralph didn't like him. They just went, with Stephen, in the first, your relationship started or ended in the first 5 seconds. And that's just the way he was. And he never would change his mind. But I loved him. I have a high tolerance for genius. And he was an authentic, honest-to-God genius. Anyway, BMW Ultimate Driving Machine is a big idea. We talked about why. So all those things begin with insight. All the campaigns we've talked about begin with insight. And I know people do research and grind all kinds of data and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know what they're doing with all that data because the work isn't reflecting it. At least I can't see it. So even in the golden age, I say, we had a lot of uninspired thinking and small ideas, but the output of big ideas and memorable campaigns was amazing, right? So I've got a list that I want to read to you, because this is a bunch of campaigns. Well, first of all, in the old days, the last line of a commercial or the bottom line of an ad was what we called a theme line. It's now called a tagline, which is probably appropriate for the diminishing of the genre. But that theme line was agonized over. That was the company's heart and soul that they wanted you to remember. At the end of whatever they did, that's what they wanted you to take away and keep in mind when you were thinking about a car or a soap flake or whatever the hell it was. So those were important ideas, and the clients cared about them, and they invested heavily in, and they kept them for years, by the way. I should read you some. Some of these things have become part of the culture, and most of them weren't. The last time they ran was before most of us were born. But people still know, if you read the line, they know what the client was. So De Beer is a diamond is forever, right? The insight is probably is obvious, right? Versus what else you can get for Valentine's Day. Hallmark, when you care enough to send the very best, which lasted for decades. M&M's, the milk chocolate that melts in your mouth, not in your hand, right? You know them, right?
I know one of these.
Clairol, brilliant. Does she or
Does she,
doesn't she? Only your hairdresser knows for sure.
I still remember every line, yeah.
Yellow Pages, let your fingers do the walking. Here you go. Virginia Slims, you've come a long way, baby. Right? GE, we bring good things to life. American Express, don't leave home without us. McDonald's, you deserve a break today.
And we spoke to Keith about that.
About that
Keith
one.
Reinhardt about that one. It was brilliant, yeah.
Memorex, is it live or is it Memorex?
It's one of my favorites, yeah.
Marines, the few, the proud, the
the
Marines, right? AT&T, reach out and touch sometime. New York Times, all the news is fit to print. United Airlines, fly the friendly skies of United. FedEx, when it absolutely, positively has to be there overnight. Club Med, the antidote for civilization, plug. Apple, a computer for the rest of us. UPS, we run the tightest ship in the shipping business.
That's one of yours.
Yeah. They were a great client. Wheaties, the breakfast of champions. And Nike, Just Do It, which is still around, right? One of the few. So that was then.
Right. Let's talk about that. Nike one really is one that I use a lot when I speak. Because I say that, at some point, Phil Knight was sitting around a table and somebody put that idea down and they showed him the swoosh and the name and they said, oh, we call it Nike, we're going to steal Puma's logo, turn it upside down and say, just do it. And somebody at that table said, that's bullshit, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. And instead, what he did is for the next 50 years, or however long it's been, they just put all the money behind it.
Yeah.
Never changed it.
Yeah.
Never agonized over that being who they were. And look where they are today versus so many others who
wannabes.
Every 5 minutes are going back to their agencies. It's no good. Change it. We have to do something else.
Well, what we have now is...
They've iterated off of that till today. They continue to iterate off. They don't have to say it. They don't have to show it, but they iterate off that very thought.
Exactly. BMW wouldn't have to put so much copy in either because everybody knows what
The ultimate drum machine, right? They're iterating off that same idea.
Yeah.
So the power of...
And it's as valuable an asset as any that a company possesses. But they don't get it, evidently. They don't appreciate that. But and that's why those companies invested so heavily in it and kept it so long. Unless they changed who they were, that was their heart and soul. That's what they wanted you to remember. So those are gone. I can't think of one. But so here, okay, I'm going to pick on a client. I probably shouldn't, but Toyota will spend $1.5 billion estimated this year in media alone, not including production. And at the end of that commercial, or at the bottom of an ad, their theme line is "Let's go places." And I look at that and I say, that could be New York Transit, it could be a bicycle company, it could be anybody. This is one of the great automobile manufacturers on the planet Earth, and that's all they have to say at the end of all that money. Let's go places, really? I mean, check writers are as guilty as the copywriters. So what do we have now? Toyota, Let's go places. Lincoln, The Power of Sanctuary. I'm still trying to figure out what the hell that means. Cadillac, Rise Above. This is, I think, their 8th theme line in maybe 8 months. Infinity, Luxury Should Be Lived In. I guess this is for homeless people who live in their cars. Bayer, This Is Why We Science. And that's not a typo, that's what they say. This is why we science. Geico, 15 minutes. Geico's a pet peeve of mine because they spend $2 billion in advertising or more. And at the end, they end up with 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance. As we used to think in the marketing business, price is the worst strategy you can have. Because soon as somebody comes, well, they're outspending everybody by, well, they're still only number 2. I think it's Allstate or State Farm or somebody, which spends about $300 million, is still ahead of them. I don't know why, but there it is. I mean, they spend an enormous amount of money, and they change their campaigns frequently, and I can't follow it. Prudential, Bring Your Challenges. Okay. Some of the challenges they're talking about are, should you marry me? Colgate toothpaste, do more for your whole mouth. Pepsi, For the Love of It. Coke, Taste the Feeling. Coke and Pepsi both have done some of the great campaigns in all of advertising over the years. The Real Thing, Pepsi Generation. Brilliant stuff for people who say, well, it's just a soft drink. You can't do anything great for us. Well, they did great stuff for a soft drink. In fact, that's the only thing people remember are those campaigns that haven't run in decades. Microsoft, Be What's Next. I don't know what that means. AT&T, Your World Delivers. Who knows what that means? Verizon, America's most reliable network. That's about as flat-footed as you can. Dell, Be Direct. GE, Technology is how we do things. People are why we do things. And FedEx, We Deliver by Delivering, which is the most enigmatic of all of them, right? HP, Let's Make Things Better. Samsung, Turn On Tomorrow. IBM, Think 3.0. J&J, We Never Stop Taking Care of You. This, in the face of all the problems that they're going through, seems a little strange to be running. And UBS, For Some of Life's Questions. I'm sorry, it's UBS, not Prudential. For some of life's questions, you're not alone. That's their line. Together, we can find an answer. By the way, the questions that they mention are, where do I come from? Will you marry me? And what do we name the twins? No kidding. With some music that, I don't know. And finally, I've made a unilateral decision to award a special place in hell to Liberty Mutual's abusively annoying Emu campaign. And its vacuous theme line, only pay for what you get. I thought that's always what we pay for, what you get. I don't know, maybe not. Anyway.
Well, luckily, we have liability insurance. This is good. So let me ask you a question. So you've got,
I'm going to have to leave town now, right?
So some would say.
You promised me the witness protection program.
Yeah, don't worry, you're in. I'm going with you. So some would say that by focusing on the theme lines, as you call them, that's old-fashioned, we're talking in the past, so whatever. Wait. But what I want to say is that you, on the other hand, because I know, have made huge investments in digital marketing, in the digital world. So it's not like you're coming at this from some ancient place looking backwards saying, oh my God, I wish. You are one of the leaders in our industry and one of the first people to really start investing privately and big in the digital world.
It's true. In
So I want everyone to
1990,
understand that. It's not like you're coming at this from some old place.
no, in 1990, I was one of the avant-garde in the digital world, and I saw it coming like a freight train. It came a little later, actually, than I thought it was coming. But in 1998, we had 28 people in a digital group, which was about 28 times more than anybody else.
Right.
And it was vital, and it was brilliant people. They all went off to start other companies eventually. But digital is a medium. Digital is one of the problems that advertising has suffered over the last decade and a half. First, they denied that it existed, and then they said it wouldn't last, and then they became like the Stockholm syndrome. And what some agency is saying, we're not an advertising agency, we're a digital agency. I think it's one of the big ones. A European, whatever the holding. Yeah, okay. So, well, no, digital's a medium, and you may handle what you say differently in newspapers or matchbooks or social media
As we always
or television. We always did, exactly. But it's not just being there that counts, which is what they seem to believe. Just being there is enough. Well, no. I mean, you can get attention by dropping your pants on Madison Avenue, but, attention for what?
Right.
If you don't say anything, no matter where you say it, it still amounts to nothing. And that's what they don't seem to be thinking anymore. I don't know. Big ideas, let's talk about ideas. Big ideas have changed the world. They've started religions, they've caused wars, and they've built some great companies, by the way, like the Apples and the BMWs and whatnot.
And by the way, it's still driving people's attention, like Greta Thunberg. I mean, these are people who are preaching big ideas and not preaching little things.
Exactly. And that's what advertising understood then and seems to have completely lost its way now. So there is an opportunity at the end of this for people who understand this and believe it, clients as well as agencies. People who have the guts to bring forth big ideas and big thinking will reap the benefits because consumers will buy what they're selling. And companies will, a big idea is also a rallying point for a company. BMW knew what they were building. They were a bunch of automotive engineers and race drivers who just wanted to build something they wanted to drive. That was really and the Quant family, who still owns the controlling shares of it, allowed them to do that. But they didn't know what it meant, what the significance of it was. And so when we defined them finally, they rallied around it so quickly. And they've been producing the same car for the last 25 years. Different cars, different models, but it's still the ultimate driving machine. And that can be whether it's an electric car. It could be the ultimate driving machine of the electric car category. And they're still one of the purest companies I've ever worked with. And so it's a rallying point. It's also a recruiting point, particularly for the millennials and what's coming behind the millennials. They want causes. They like to be involved in something that they feel is more important than just selling stuff. So
right,
no.
it's bigger than just the next tactic.
So no, big ideas have literally changed the world, and they changed advertising in its best days, and they changed companies in their golden year, American companies. So no, it should be brought back, and clients should demand it. And I have this theory that the agencies are so under the heel at the moment that they're not going to be able to change it on their own. I think the change is going to start with companies. But then companies have to understand what a big idea is. They have to be educated. They don't learn that in business school.
And be inspired. So
yeah, and see the value. Actually, what's happening now is a multi-billion-dollar mistake. It's the example I gave before. A client tearing up $15 million in small bills and throwing them out the window after a Super Bowl commercial that nobody understands or cares about, or I don't know any company that would let that happen in any other department. I mean, $15 million, 30 seconds, 50, 60 seconds.
So I wish I'd been sitting in the audience and watching this and taking notes
Yeah.
instead of having told you. But I want to thank you for
Well, thank you
having
for
joined
inviting
us.
me. I always love to
in
see
New York
you.
festivals. I love to see you. Also, you are my sartorial. In fact, I was going to dress like this today, and I'm glad I didn't, because those are the kind of ties that I wear. I learned the knit tie thing from you.
I know, yeah.
And I've been wearing them for 20 years. The only thing is you didn't do the Nehru jacket today,
No,
which you owe me one.
Yeah, I do.
We'll
I
talk
do.
about it
Next
after
time I'll wear that
We'll
one.
talk about this. No, but you owe me one. I want one, and you promised me. So we'll talk about that after. But really, I just want to thank you, Martin Puris. You're one of the legends of the industry. You've been an inspiration to me. And
Some people
and
think
I know,
I'm a pain in the ass, but go ahead.
No, that's okay. No, only the clients that you fired back then. But you've always been an inspiration to me, and I know that everybody who's paying attention to this notion of big ideas not being an old idea, but actually being a rallying cry for industry and for us in our industries. I hope everybody's paying attention. I'm sure they were. I'm sure that at the New York festivals we'll see the results of people listening closely to what you said. So
I
thank
hope
you
so,
again.
because I love the business, or I love the business that was, or something.
Well, I still love it. So
Yeah.
there we go.
A lot of great people.
Thank you.
Thanks.